Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Wheeler, Editor-in-Chief at HW Media, and I'm your host today for this Lunch and Learn focused on the role of appraisers in the future of valuation. Turnaround times and appraisal gaps are just some of the valuation issues that are complicating real estate deals across the country. We also have an appraiser workforce that is aging and shrinking, leading to questions about the future of appraisers in the valuation process. In today's Lunch and Learn session, I'll be joined by Paul Doman, President and CEO of the Accurate Group, and Rick Hill, the Vice President of Industry Tech at the Mortgage Bankers Association. It's going to be a great discussion. I've got lots of questions for Paul and Rick, but we also want to make sure this session is interactive. So please add your questions by clicking on the chat or the Q&A buttons, and we will get to them at the end. So Paul and Rick, welcome to the Lunch and Learn.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to be here.
Great to have you both. Let's start with you, Paul. Let's start at the top. What do you think the future of valuation looks like, and what is the appraiser's role in this future?
Wow, big question to start with, but clearly, if we think about the future of valuation right now, I think everyone has to keep in mind that technology is going to transform the way real estate is valued. There is absolutely no doubt in that. That's happening as we speak. I think on the good news side, there's a tremendous opportunity to look at real estate appraisal as essentially a risk-based cascade, and there'll be more options on how to value real estate with a variety of different products as we go forward. There also will be technology-driven solutions to gather real estate data, do inspections, incorporate AI and machine learning into the valuation process. With all of that, though, the appraiser still is going to play a fundamental role, we believe, and I believe. Appraisers are inherently important to the valuation process for one major reason that we oftentimes forget, and whenever we forget it, we normally get in trouble. But real estate is entirely local, and the local expertise of appraisers is invaluable, and I think it will continue to be.
Yeah, I really like that, the duality there, right? We're seeing so much technology come into the space, and we can leverage that technology, but at the end of the day, I think there still is that role for the appraiser. And Rick, I'd love to know what you think about that big question.
Yeah, thanks. And my apologies as we started. I had somebody walk in and start talking. So my apologies for that. But thanks for talking about this. I think, when I think about appraisal, every industry is changing due to technology. Some started changing a while back. Some, have been a little bit slower. And so I think about really what has changed in all of these industries. And it's often a process of trying to get rid of the more rote activities that someone is doing so that they can focus on the value add part of the activity. When I think about the appraiser, you think about the current process, their value to the industry is their ability to help say that seems like a good value for this property based on the information that's available. So the gathering of the information really, it's part of their expertise. So you don't want to ignore that. But there's also a lot of information, a lot of gathering that really isn't necessarily something that they always have to do. So I look at the appraiser role as maintaining a responsibility around looking at the either the output or assessing more information and making judgment, and perhaps a good bit less around the mechanical part of the data gathering to then assess. So I think, you can see how that changes. Paul mentioned some of the stuff. I think the gathering, I think there's going to be more data. I think it's going to be gathered from a lot of additional sources. Perhaps information is pre-populated in some tools for an appraiser. And then they use their skill really to do that assessment. Think about it sort of that desktop, I know we'll talk later, but desktop appraisals, kind of think about it in that sense that, they're really looking at a lot more information.
Yeah, I was really surprised. We had a HW annual event this year, in 2021 now, we had an appraisal panel with someone from Fannie Mae on, and they mentioned how much variance there is between different appraisals on the same house when it came to square footage, which is something that I feel like is one of the most basic things about a house, right? Is like, the house is this big, this is how many square feet are in the house. But because in this refi period, and because of Fannie's data, they have data on the same house over and over again that gets appraised. And there was a huge variance. There wasn't a huge variance. There was a significant variance over a huge amount of those. And so I think when you think about the fact that even just that very basic thing that should be a physical thing that you can measure, you get different measurements there. I think that just shows you some of the challenges that we're up against when you're talking about not using technology or people using different technology. So Rick, let's talk about, in the pandemic period, you mentioned a lot of companies are going through very different, a lot of changes right now anyway. And of course, we saw through the pandemic period, 2020, 2021, a lot of shifts. So Rick, how did the appraisal industry handle the high origination volume we had and then the COVID restrictions?
Yeah, and I think Paul will be able to definitely articulate some of this. I'll try to be a little careful in thinking about some of it. I think we forget sometimes. Let me back up. There are some folks are like, worried from the lending side, uncertainty of when they're going to get the appraisal done. Some of the costs have gone up and all. Reality, but with the volume, went through the roof. And I think a lot of folks forget that volume increased tremendously. And so, I think it's very admirable that we were able to actually get as many appraisals, done in this. Paul probably has really good statistics on exactly how many get done by each appraiser and all of that. So I won't really try to talk about it. But you do get to a point where people don't scale, right? That's the problem with every industry when we try to scale a person or we try to throw bodies at it. That's usually when things start to break down a little bit. And you get to a point where you physically can't have enough people doing something. And we can't bring a ton of new appraisers in overnight and say, great, go do this. It's a skill. And it's not something you take a 22-year-old person who has no skill and say, hey, you're hired, go do an appraisal. So I think there was a lot of really good effort to do new things, to try to bring additional data, to the appraisers. Certainly the desktop appraisals and some of the AVM support that investors were okay with. I think that also helped, right, to deal with that huge volume that we were dealing with. Waivers of appraisals is a little different because it's not how the appraisal industry dealt with it, but it's how industry dealt with it, right? Which is they said, look, there's some transactions that are really, really low risk. And we have other information and we have others, let's say prior sales, recent sales, let's say in the same condo building or whatever. Do I really need an appraisal in certain situations? And I think that, there was a lot of flexibility for that. And we were able to learn, from all of that. So I think there was, surprisingly, I guess, for the volume increase, probably not as much pain as maybe we should have expected for such a high volume growth. I know, Paul, if you've got...
Rick, I think you're dead on there. If you look at it in the right context, the industry handled it remarkably well. The amount of volume that was thrown into the system in 2020 and 2021 was remarkable. And we all have talked about and understand the limitations of the number of appraisers. And, I think the industry handled it very well based on what occurred. There's certainly some things we could do better. And you mentioned, if you look at the private markets, where you don't have kind of the requirements of the GSEs for traditional appraisal, they adapted very well. So in investor-driven markets, you did see a dramatic increase in the use of desktop appraisals, more use of AVMs, combining those with inspections, of course, but adapting to different products that give the appraisal community the opportunity to scale better. Because your point that you can't scale people is exactly right. And so the way we thought about it and where we could is that an appraiser working at the desk can actually be almost 4 times more efficient than they are when they work in both the desk and the field. So if you take the inspection requirement out of the mix, an appraiser can complete 4 desktops to every 1 traditional process appraisal. And that's what gives you scale. And I think the industry responded well to that where it could, where the guidelines allowed them to. The second part of the question about COVID, I think, was tremendous. I think the industry adapted very well to the limitations that COVID brought on, an appraiser's comfort level and willingness and a consumer's comfort level and willingness to have someone in their property. So we quickly adapted and built remote data collection products that could be coupled with an appraisal. The GSEs were very flexible and created the appraisal flexibilities so that appraisals could be done with either remote data or no data at all at the local level. And I think the innovators really did a great job allowing the consumers to build and get access to technology that they can inspect properties themselves. And that data could be used by folks at the desk to value properties. And that was a remarkable occurrence in COVID because it came out of nowhere, of course, and people moved quickly to adapt. So I thought the industry handled the situation very well. Certainly, turn times were extended, costs went up, and those things we'll talk about hopefully being a little less severe as we head into 2022. But overall, the industry did very well.
Well, let's talk about that. The market now, refi is going to continue to fall as a share of the originations that we done. So we're in a purchase market, which definitely you have less waivers and less desktop appraisals maybe on some of those things. And so one thing I want to follow up on there, Paul, is when you said the appraisers were 4 times as productive, right? But if they're not doing the inspection, what were, having homeowners do their own, taking pictures or whatever, what did we see on that as far as accuracy, as far as, did those hold up as we looked at them?
In our data analysis on that topic, Sarah, we saw the quality hold up, meaning appraisals that were produced and that are produced using data collected from the field using either consumers or third parties like realtors or real estate brokers. Those appraisals performed very well relative to the traditional process where the appraiser is gathering data on both sides. So our data shows us that we didn't see any deterioration in the quality and values that were produced by the product and the process. I think the GSEs are also are telling us that they're seeing the same thing. And part of, and I'll let Rick comment on this, the reason why we're going to see the desktop products become part of policy is the quality did hold up and the data that was collected on that topic. So that was another great thing. I mean, despite process change, using the right technology and incorporating it into a good process, you can produce values that are on par with a traditional process. Excuse me.
Rick, do you want to weigh in there?
I think actually on that one, Paul covered it quite well.
We're already getting a question that's kind of mirrored my last question, which is like, what is the guarantee that's being given that what we're getting a value on is what we really have when you take the inspection process away from, a trained appraiser? And so I do think that's one of the questions that people in the industry feel like, does it need to be a real estate agent? Can it be the homeowner? I think the homeowner was necessary during some parts of COVID, but going forward, hopefully as we get to the end of these waves, is that really what we want to do? And so I'd ask each of you what you think about what is the best person to do that, or is technology the best to do that? What does that look like?
Can you clarify? I just want to make sure, meaning to do certain of the things, some of the measurements, taking pictures, that kind of things.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Paul used the term, risk early on in this conversation. And I think, I've been around risk in a bunch of ways for a long time. And I think that's really what the driver is I don't think you can look at it and say, in all things, we're going to go a certain way or not. I think it's going to be based on certain types of risk factors and situations on what you utilize for something. If you feel, let's say we're at a point a couple years into the future, and we feel we've got tremendous information, let's say on a housing development, and many of the houses are fairly similar and similar age and all of that. Might you feel, and let's say housing prices are relatively stable, right? A little different perhaps than right now. Might you be able to get some things where, let's say the homeowner takes some pictures, we know because of GIS and whatever, it actually is that house, right? Because you've got the coordinates and whatnot. That might be okay. Frankly, the phone can measure while it's taking pictures too, right? So you can make sure certain things haven't changed and have, fairly high certainty of the information. So I think something like that can be a trade-off in certain situations. And then in others, I'm sure there's going to be this time at some point in the future where there's technology can do every house in some fashion. But I think for a long time, there's going to be a lot of properties that are really unique, and you really somehow want somebody independent of a homeowner collecting information. I think you've got extremes, but I don't know that there's a one size fits all.
Yeah, I think, Rick, you're exactly right. It comes down to risk. And what I mentioned at the outset is kind of the risk-based decisioning or risk-based cascading on the products and workflow processes that you select to value the property. That's clearly important. And I do think one way this situation is going to be solved is through technology, and it is being solved through technology. We have the technology to actually assist a consumer to inspect a property and to validate, just like we're online together, that the individual is at the property, that the individual is appropriately displaying the correct attributes of the property and measuring the property with our assistance. So if you think about borrower-assisted data capture, that's entirely within the realm of possibility today, and that goes a long way to prevent fraud. But you only apply that process on the right loan characteristics and on the right product characteristics. And one thing about real estate, we know, just like real estate is very important to keep in mind, it's local. You have to always understand that one size is not going to fit all. So applying those processes in the right environment are going to give us the scale we need to solve some of the problems we've been facing. If we tried to just use the same standard appraisal on every single transaction, the system would have been overwhelmed in 2020 and 2021. So you've got to be able to customize based on risk. And these new processes keep that in mind. And we're not advocating that they be kind of all or nothing.
So, we saw in October, the FHFA extended some of their, they made some of those flexibilities they had put in place during COVID permanent. And that is especially true for desktop appraisals on purchase loans, right? Starting this year, starting now. So, what are the impacts of FHFA doing that, making that permanent? We've got several questions about that, but that was one of my questions anyway. And Paul, maybe you can start off there.
Happy to. So certainly the policy change is going to occur. Desktops will be part of the policy, but there's a lot yet we don't know. We are expecting the policy to be out in February. We don't exactly know when, and we're hoping to see even implementation of the policy in the first quarter. So that would really be March. It's a big change, and I think it's a great change. Personally, I think the change will relieve some of the current stress on the appraisal community because of volume. And we're going to be dealing with a declining market on the refi side. So purchases obviously are going to be the product, and we'll be focused on figuring out how many purchases the new policy are going to apply to. We haven't yet seen what are the risk-based parameters that are going to be used to select a purchase transaction for the desktop process. So those might be loan to value, of course. Those might be the credit quality of the consumer. There's a variety of factors, and we'll have to see out of total purchases what portion are going to be eligible for the desktop product. But I think anytime you bring new choices to the table on valuation, you're benefiting the industry and you're creating the scale we need to solve some of our current problems. So we're excited about it, a lot to learn, but we're planning now to be ready in March to handle a significant number of desktops on purchase transactions.
It strikes me you started to allude to, I think the hard part with any of these things is the change. It's not necessarily when you get to the new thing, but change, anytime any of us go through change, right? It can create, some difficulties. When you think about desktop appraisal, and we talked about sort of the future, and Paul, loved it if you agree, but it seems to me it's a little bit of a step toward a future where what I mentioned earlier, the appraiser is less in the information gathering role and more in the assessment role. And it seems to me that when I think about desktop appraisals, it's a step down that path, right? And perhaps we'll get to this question perhaps a little bit later. Perhaps some of that role will also enable us to attract some new participants in the industry, right? Who maybe don't want to be driving around from property to property or feel uncomfortable, frankly, doing it. Maybe it opens it up for some new folks to do it.
Rick, I think that's exactly right. I think people should understand that the desktop appraisal is really the same form and same data content as the 1004. And there actually is no requirement that an appraiser could do an inspection on a desktop appraisal. They certainly could choose to do that, and some people may. But the data is the same. The form is the same. The opportunity to create efficiency and scale for appraisers is there. And it could be a very positive thing for appraisers to be able to perform more transactions, complete more of those desktop appraisals for a very similar fee, and possibly enhance their income. So there are opportunities for appraisers with the product as well. I think the other thing to keep in mind with this policy change is that the FHFA is still thinking about, and so are the GSEs, additional policy changes. So the pilots related to hybrid appraisals are still ongoing. And that data is being collected, I think, and I believe clearly with the goal of starting to incorporate when hybrid appraisals can be used as part of policy. So that's the future, and there will be more change following this change. And I think your point about change is great, Rick. I think it's something we all need to adapt to.
You would think it's actually the way we would hope to be, so that we don't every X number of years have such massive change, right? Which is more impactful and can be adversely impactful when you have such massive change, incremental change, right? Adapting some new information, some new tools for the appraiser. It just this thing that allows us to just keep incrementally moving forward is to me a lot better than what I'll call as a former person in development areas, sort of big bang stuff. Big bang stuff creates a lot of collateral damage, right? Not necessarily because it's a bad thing, but it's just so much change at one time that it just really can adversely affect parties.
You guys alluded to this just in that last exchange there about how we can possibly attract more people, right? There's an appraiser shortage. We all know that, especially in rural areas. And given the average appraiser is in their early 60s, we have to bring younger and more diverse talent to the appraisal profession if it's to survive. I think it's interesting that you both see the introduction of technology or say desktop appraisals as being, giving them a better career, because there's also the argument that, hey, how do you attract someone into a profession that looks like it might be getting disrupted, like truly by technology? And so love to get your thoughts there.
Yes, I'll start off. I think, so there's all the talk of, frankly, that the average appraiser kind of looks like me, right? And with the gray hair and all of that. Hopefully, folks will be staying. When I think about what might be attractive, certainly technology is attractive to folks younger than myself. Well, frankly, there's lots of folks, our age who are also, really not afraid of technology. Especially things that are designed certain ways. And so I think, technology really can be something that is attractive, both to groups of people who like technology, who want to learn it, who like to create new things and use it, for evaluation process in this case. But it's not just, I think, tech folks. I implied this too, but rural areas, it might frankly be hard to get some new people to want to be, appraisers who happen to live in some certain areas. Can we use, technology and can you, some of the newer folks use technology to help value properties that are more rural? And I don't want to imply anybody walking away that, you can be, everybody can be really far away and have a really good understanding of the value. I mean, I don't want to minimize all of those other things too. I'm just saying that technology can be a component of trying to bring in, newer skills. The other part of it, I think, can also be is a little bit perhaps on some of the diversity side of it, and might today the appraisal process be uncomfortable, let's say for women, perhaps, because they don't want to go into certain areas alone or whatever. If you can use the technologies as part of that, then you remove that hindrance, that barrier, perhaps, that exists. And so I think, the new technologies can help with bringing in, newer folks, and newer folks meaning, age and sex and whatever. And so I think in certain situations that can be helpful. Do I think that solves the shortage that we have or the desire for more? Perhaps not in the short run. And I will tell you, if I had that answer, I'm sure a lot of people would be paying me a really good amount of money right now if I could solve that. Paul?
That's exactly right, Rick.
Did Paul freeze or all of us?
I think it's Paul, so we might come back to him here in just a second. Do have several questions in the chat that are directly related to what I just asked you guys. So, Rick, can I ask you this? I don't know if you know this, but do you foresee a standardized desktop appraisal form?
Standardized desktop appraisal form. So as being someone who was responsible for overseeing MISMO for a decade, I would certainly say I would hope that when...
Did I freeze there, folks?
You did for a minute, yeah.
You did. I'm going to go right back to you. Rick was answering a question, then I'll throw it back to you, Paul.
Sorry about that.
So I'm a big believer that standardizing flows of information, forms, any of that helps to rectify inconsistencies in communication and whatnot. The GSEs are, as I think many folks know, are looking to evolve the appraisal form, and trying to take a lot of what historically has been in text and make it what we'll just call codifiable information or data, to get rid of some of the uncertainty and misinterpretation. And I think, forms, when they can be, when something is done commonly in all transactions, standardizing input forms, output forms, the way you describe things, that's critical to not just the collection, but very importantly, the risk assessment on the back end, right? The inconsistency makes it more difficult to draw conclusions and to assess the risk that you have. And so I will always be very partial personally to standardization where it makes sense, right? There's going to be times when, frankly, it doesn't make sense. And so I would never want to say that there's always a standard, but I think in any input, output forms, things like that, absolutely standards make sense.
Paul, the question that he just answered was, do we see a standardized desktop appraisal form coming? So you can answer that, but also go back to, how do we draw more people into the appraisal industry?
Yeah, the answer on the desktop appraisal form is absolutely yes. It exists today. It's out there. So check out the form, and the data set is standard. I agree with Rick that there's going to be further standardization on the data set. But one thing I wanted to do for folks listening to this session is give a plug for kind of two initiatives, organizations that are going on to help drive more appraisers into the industry and also to diversify. Actually Fannie Mae and the MBA are both driving something known as Future Housing Leaders. And Future Housing Leaders has a commitment to training and finding new appraisers to enter into the industry. So we're looking hard at sponsoring and working with that Future Housing Leaders group to try to promote more appraisers from entering into the industry. In addition, the Appraisal Institute and the GSEs are both driving support of the Appraisal Diversity Initiative. That's another hugely important initiative that is trying to make the appraisal industry look less like myself and Rick, and really bring more diverse folks into the industry at the outset. So those would be new entrants as well. So those two things I'd ask people to check out and learn about, because we all can help sponsor those and help promote those to get more appraisers into the industry.
Yeah, I was going to mention that initiative as well, the one that is Future Housing Leaders, because that's such a great program to get people in. One of the questions that we had from our attendees is that they're saying they noticed a direct correlation between the fee offered to the appraiser and the quality of work performed. I know some appraisers would say that that's not true, but this is what this person is saying. And has there been consideration given to raising the fees to appraisers that complete the desktop reports? So that might be a way to, again, make this something that attracts people into the industry.
I don't know if there's been consideration on raising that fee. Paul might have some insight.
Yeah, I can clearly say that whether it be standard appraisals or desktops, we focus very heavily on finding appraisers who produce quality reports. And what we see is you absolutely have to pay a fair fee for good quality work. There's no doubt about it. Our best customer relationships, our best service level performance as we manage the appraisal process is primarily driven by fees that are really reasonable for the work that's involved. And we really measure that quality. I would say there are appraisers who aren't worried about the fee they're paid. They're always going to produce quality work, but that correlation exists, and it's another reason why appraisers deserve to be paid a really good wage for what they do.
I appreciate that. We did have a question early on about why didn't we have like a boots on the ground appraiser on this panel. We did have several iterations of different, but we had these two and then some other people who were going to be panelists, but with sickness still kind of working through the industry, that person was not able to join, which is one of those things. But we really do try to have someone who's a boots on the ground appraiser, because I know that they often can feel like in these discussions they're left out. I don't feel like that's the case. I feel like Rick and Paul can, having worked in this space, can do that. But just wanted to put that out there. Let's switch the conversation a little bit. So, in the news over the last month or so, Zillow's iBuyer business imploded, and Rich Barton said that the company's valuation model had an observed error rate that was far more volatile than they ever expected. And what that did was, people had opinions on, hey, is the whole AVM, is the AVM model broken, or was it just Zillow's model that was broken? So we covered that pretty extensively. I'm not going to ask you guys to comment on Zillow specifically, but let's broaden it out a little bit and let's talk about AVMs in general and what some of those challenges and the opportunities you see there.
I'll go ahead and start, I guess. Look, AVMs, they're here to stay. There's value in them. The waivers and all done by the GSEs, they may or may not call that decisioning behind an AVM or not, but the reality is that these tools are there. They can be quite valuable as both standalone or as support to a process. Might some models in certain situations sort of not be great? Might they be misused? It's always possible. If somebody thinks that a model's out there and I'm going to use it perhaps in a different way, maybe to manage risk or whatever in some other way. And sometimes, if you talk to modelers, right, they'll tell you about the modeling risk, right? And certainly one of them is to use it in the wrong place. And so, I think you need to be very, very conscious. AVMs are also not static. They constantly have to be refreshed, challenged. They need to evolve to ensure that they are able to provide, what they do provide. I think, the hard part also with any of this, whether it's a human or an AVM, we're trying to sort of assess a reasonableness of a value on a property at a point in time. And it's based on kind of the information you have at the point in time. There's things that change and some might look at it and say, well, so the plant closed in the town, the week after, something was appraised or whatever. Okay, well, that's going to be a problem for any appraisal, right? If it's the only plant that's in town. And I think, we have to be conscious of what any of these valuation people or tools are really trying to do. They're only as good as the information that the system or the person has at the time. And they are, it's very difficult when people start to think about using them to sort of project the future. That's a harder thing, but Paul, you have a lot of depth in this space.
Thanks, Rick. I think you're spot on in many ways. One of the things you really got to think about, one thing I think you're spot on is that AVMs are here to stay. AVMs are valuing thousands upon thousands of properties a month for purposes of loan origination. That is happening every single day, every single minute of this day. So you got to talk about what are the problems with AVMs. They're not an all for nothing proposition. One of the fundamental issues with AVMs is they assume, fundamentally, everyone assumes that the property is in average condition. And this might have been, I don't know what the Zillow issue was, but this might have been part of the problem. Using AVMs based on the assumption that properties are in average condition without actually validating the property's condition can be a significant risk, particularly if you're being adversely selected and people are only willing to sell you homes that are not in very good condition, which might have also happened to Zillow. So you always have to combine an AVM with some type of data capture that gives you the current condition of the property. That's what an appraisal does, certainly, with the data set that we collect. So you need to combine it with some type of inspection process, and that's going to remarkably improve your decision making, because they are a point in time. You need all the data you can to validate the assumptions behind the AVM. So inspections are the key to making them work well for purposes of lending decisions. That's a key point, I think, that I would share there. They're not part of the problem. AVMs can be used very effectively. Certainly their utility in rural markets is low, and certain markets where data is not readily available, they can be very low. But in the vast majority of urban markets, suburban markets, when you couple them with an inspection and you have good inspection technology, you can really utilize AVMs effectively and safely as part of a risk-based collateral valuation solution.
Definitely getting some comments that, have different issues with AVMs. So somebody said, AVMs don't take geographical or commercial influences into consideration. I don't know if that's correct or not. Don't know if either of you want to comment on that.
It's true. I think that's exactly right. You can argue in some ways they do, but fundamentally the answer is they don't. That's why coupling an inspection to gather those influences is important.
I think Paul is pointing out, as we evolve, again, back to what we said earlier too, it's not all or nothing. It's the AVM coupled with something, right? Coupled with an inspection, coupled with a drive-by, coupled with a drone visit, right? As technology changes. And I think it will keep evolving as we understand the risk and the how well do the tools and individuals who are assessing it play out as we go forward. What are the situations where some other combination of additional tools or assessment tools or whatever can help with this process? Again, it's not all or nothing. I think we have to keep thinking about that and recognizing that. I think folks perhaps think AVMs are going to come and therefore we don't need appraisals or appraisers, and I just don't hear that. And as I think Paul's saying, especially in a lot of situations, and I said this at the beginning, I just don't think you're going to see that in certain places, in certain situations. I don't think in my lifetime. Let's somehow end up living quite longer than perhaps I expect.
Which we would all hope for, Rick. Hope that happens. So we have two more really thorny issues to talk about here, and that's the thing with appraisals is there's a lot going on and there's a lot involved. So the first one is. For you, Paul, some appraisers say that AMCs, so let's talk about AMCs, don't have differentiated technology and take too big of a cut of the appraisal fee. How would you respond to these appraisers, and what role do you think AMCs will play in the future of valuations?
That's a great question. I guess I would respond and say those appraisers are working with the wrong AMCs, first of all. But beyond that, I would say that, unfortunately, I think there are companies in the industry that a small minority that are doing the wrong things. To me, as we've said numerous times here, the appraiser is an essential part of the real estate valuation equation. The appraiser deserves to be paid a reasonable and customary fee for the work they do and to be paid well. appraisal management companies at the same time deserve to be paid for the functions they perform because they do provide a valuable function beyond just being a middleman, as some appraisers like to say. We do a lot of work that is an important part of the process, whether that be quality control, whether that be paying the appraisers a fair fee for the work they're doing, paying the appraisers timely. There's a variety of things that AMCs do, and they do deserve a reasonable fee for what they do. I will say anybody who's run an appraisal management company knows this. It's probably the lowest margin business that I've been associated with in 30 years in the mortgage industry. So mortgage appraisal management companies are not making a tremendous amount of money. Those that are not paying appraisers a fair fee and keeping a large portion of the fee for themselves will not be around for long. I think those are the companies that are here temporarily, and the evolution in the market with technology will take those actors out of the equation. And so I don't think you're going to see that being a significant problem for long. Anybody who has a long-term business vision is not going to take that approach, because they have to remember that appraisers are an essential part of the process. So I do think that occurs. I think it's unfortunate. I think those players will not be in the industry for long, but I do think appraisal management companies also play a vital role and deserve to be paid a fee that's reasonable for their work.
Rick, what do you see as the future? Is the future going to continue to be AMCs? Is it going to be more direct? Is it going to be something different altogether?
That's an interesting one. From an AMC perspective, I think I have to say this is probably my personal opinion, because I don't know that I have enough facts there. But as Paul just said, they're playing a role. It's a role that kind of necessary in today's world. So I think they're going to be there. I don't, they sort of grew up in a lot of ways because of some of the things that happened a decade plus ago, and those concerns I don't think have changed with regulators and whatnot. So I think you're still gonna have them playing that role, because if they don't, some other entities need to play that same role, and okay, then you're just shifting the same question that Paul just answered to some other party. So I think they're going to be there.
I appreciate both of your perspectives on that. The last thorny issue that we want to.
Can I add?
Sure.
One thing to that too. One interesting thing about technology on this topic is that it can be a tool to provide total transparency. So those appraisal management companies that are managing their businesses well and investing in developing good technology normally are completely transparent, meaning the appraiser knows exactly what they're going to be paid. The appraiser knows what the AMC is going to be paid, and the total fee for the transaction is completely transparent. And that, I think, is a great way to manage this too, is full transparency. So everyone sees, the value that they're being paid for the work they're performing. And that's important for consumers to understand too. So technology is another driver here that I think can eliminate that kind of concern or doubt about the future.
Appreciate that. As we come to the close of our time here, we still have about 10 minutes, which I would encourage anyone, put questions in there if you want us to ask them. I'm going to try to get through all of these questions that you have asked, if I haven't brought them up already. But my last question really has to do with appraisal bias. Huge issue and a huge focus of the current administration. I know that at HousingWire, we've actually tried to get our hands around, what does the data say about appraisal bias? It's been very difficult because the agencies and entities that take in the complaints and those things don't share that information and don't even give us an idea of the complaints they do have. What does that look like? What are the numbers? What does that look like? We had Freddie Mac release a report in September that showed pretty convincing evidence of homes being systematically undervalued in Black and Latino neighborhoods. So my question to you both, this is something top of mind. This is a challenge, right? How do we remove as much bias as possible from the appraisal process? And that's assuming that we know that there is some bias in the system. I mean, the Freddie Mac data, from my perspective, showed some of that. I know that appraisers, if they were on here, would say that they've yet to, it's contained, it's not widespread, it might just be individuals. So, I would ask both of you, what do we do? How do we move forward?
So I think there's a couple of things that, I can say on the surface with that. As someone who uses information, to me, the more information, the more data that you rely on, and perhaps less visits to the house to look at, things that you see in the news, right? You see photos or art or whatever it happens to be that folks are saying is influencing, some of this. I think when you start to rely on more data and less around, the visit to the home for some of these things, that's a way, that's a piece that can, help to address this, where it might be happening. The other side of it, though, and I always have to be careful when you think about data and analytics and research and whatnot, is, you have to be conscious that there can be inherent bias, historical bias in the data that you're using that you might be making assessments from. So technology and data are not a panacea to fix the problem either. So I want to, I want to be careful that there's, as much as I always want to have a miracle button for something to solve some issues, this one is not an easy one. I do think more data and more technology can help. Perhaps things where perhaps technology finds something that and says, "Hey, appraiser, are you sure?" Can be programmed in. But it's another one where I certainly don't have a real crystal ball on truly how to address all of that.
There's no doubt it's an issue that we have to, I think, like any issue, first admit exists and train and make appraisers, anybody involved in the process, aware of it. I think that's starting to happen, and I'm glad that's the case. One real specific way to help with technology on the topic of bias and minimizing bias is to bifurcate the process of appraising real estate. So if an appraiser is working on their desktop and does not have access to the local subject property, and a third party is gathering that data and simply playing the role of data gatherer, and that data is delivered to the appraiser on their desktop as raw data to make their subjective decisions off of, you start to minimize the potential for bias because the appraiser isn't exposed to what's on the ground. So that's one real technology-oriented way to help. But I agree, I'm not sure, other than education, training, and certain applications of real specific technology processes, that I have the magic answer here.
And I wish we did, right? I wish any of us did. I think it's going to take a while. One of the major problems I see is that if you're using comps, which is the foundation for a lot of value, historically the different neighborhoods have been valued differently. So if you're taking historical comps, how do you ever solve that problem? How do you make up for that historical bias that we know was there, and with redlining and all of those things? And that's something that I think has to be addressed in this process.
There may be some technical ways with USPAP rules to help that. Inherently the the appraisal process is subjective and it's backward looking. If there's ways to bring some forward looking judgment and data into the process in a reasonable way, that could help. But that's beyond me right now. Rick,
any last thoughts on that?
No, it's you said you hit it, and it's I wish I had easy answers to it, but you talk about it, and you can look at two neighborhoods almost with same home builder, right, in around the same city, but they're in same lot sizes and everything, and yet they're in different places, and it brings in a different value. I want to be careful there. That may be less bias of an appraiser. And I think, as Paul was saying, look, I'm looking at recent sales here, and that's what I've got to kind of do. Whereas, geez, maybe one of them used to be the redlined area, right, from the 30s or 40s or whatever. And that's a slightly different issue to be addressing. It's all part of the same, I think, major issue, right, as a society. But it's a different thing to be trying to figure out. Are you muted, Sarah?
I am, ma'am. We're coming to the end of our time here. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Rick and Paul for being on, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. We will continue to talk about this topic and report on this topic. Really appreciate you guys coming on. This recording will be available shortly afterwards to anyone who didn't get a chance to listen to it live. But thank you, Rick and Paul.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a pleasure to be part of this. Thanks, Rick. Nice to be with you.